Hi, I'm Bill DiGiulio, and welcome to my fifth installment of my keyboard harmony videos. In this one, I'd like to just extend your knowledge just a little bit and show you how to use all those triads that we discussed in previous videos, videos 1 through 4. As you may remember, in the earlier videos of this series, I covered all the major scales and all the triads that could be produced from those scales. So now hopefully you're getting a few of those keys and possibly some of those triads under your fingers. So now I want to show you some ways we can start to use them in musical settings. With just a little bit more information, this will make them practically usable on the keyboard now in real life situations. Let's start with a concept called inversions. Let's start with our favorite major chord, C major, or at least mine. Notice the notes C, E, G. Now the one thing about triads is, and other chords, is we can rearrange the order of the notes and the chord remains the same. I'll show you what I mean. Let's take that C, E, and G. Let me take the C off the bottom and move it to the top of the chord. So now I'm playing E, G, C. Same three-letter names. So it's the same chord, actually. Now this is in what's called first inversion. When we played the chord the original way, with this being a C chord, and the C is the lowest note or on the bottom, we call that root position. Now if I take the C off the bottom and move it to the top, that would be called first inversion. Same chord, just different arrangement of the notes. Now let me take the new bottom note, the E off the bottom, and move that to the top. So now we have, from the bottom up, G, C, E. That would be called second inversion. Again, still a C major chord. Now it is slightly different sound-wise. It has a little different character, but not enough of a difference to make it a different chord. It's still the same chord. Okay, so let's do a quick review. C major triad, root position, first inversion, second inversion. Now, until you get comfortable doing this, you may have to do it very slowly. One way you might want to look at it is to take the bottom note and keep the other two and move it up to the top. Until you can start to visualize these, that's one way to physically do it. So again, I take the bottom note, leave the other two down, and move it up to the top. And that's how I would practice inverting these chords. Now, any of the triads I discussed in the previous video can be inverted in this way. Let's take an A minor triad, for example. Here's A, C, E. And since this is an A minor chord and A is our lowest note, this is in what's called root position. So now let's invert it. Let's take the bottom note and move it to the top. First inversion. Now let's take this note, move it to the top. Second inversion. So we have A minor triad root position, first inversion, second inversion. And of course this also works for our diminished triads. Here's our B diminished triad, B, D, F, first inversion, D, F, B, second inversion, F, B, D. So that would be the principle of inverting chords. Now that's the next step I would take. Once you start to get some of these chords under your fingers, is to start to practice inverting them. Now with some of the chords it's a little tricky because it's difficult to visualize that at first. But just by doing it slowly and then getting used to it, you'll start to familiarize yourself with this process. For example, even a tricky chord like C sharp major, for example, that can be inverted as well. Same principle. Root position, first inversion, second inversion. Now in future videos I'll go over why you would want to start to do that. But for this video, just notice it gives us a slightly different sound to the chord without changing the chord itself. It gives us a little bit of variation. And there's some other reasons why we want to study inversions, which I'll cover in another video. Now, one other final concept I want to discuss is how to voice chords on the keyboard. Here's what I mean by that. We learned all our triads as discussed previously. For example, C, E, G. Now I can just play that chord and it sounds fine, but let's say I want a fuller, richer sound out of that chord. What I can do is, of course, maybe play the same chord an octave lower. So that sounds bigger and fuller. But one principle we use when voicing chords on the keyboard is that the lower we go on the keyboard, in the range of the keyboard, the more we want larger intervals in the left hand. So for example, instead of playing C, E, G in both hands, in the left hand I'm going to drop out that middle note. I'm going to drop out the E. So now in the left hand I'm just playing C, G, and in the right hand I'm playing all three notes of that triad. Now this I can do with any of the triads I played in previous lessons. So notice that sounds a little bit cleaner. When we play small intervals in the lower range of the keyboard, it starts to sound muddy. For example, this C triad sounds great here, but notice down here, sounds awfully congested and muddy. So that's why we use larger intervals in the left hand. In fact, if you notice, the interval I'm playing in the left hand here is called a fifth. Because if C is 1, G is 5. So that interval sounds good lower on the keyboard. That works fine. Another interval I can use is the octave. So I could actually play this C chord like this as well. So if your hand can stretch it comfortably, I can play C and C and my C triad with the right hand. That gives us a big full sound as well. And again, this could be done with any of those chords that I discussed previously. Here's my G chord. Notice I'm leaving out the middle note of the left hand. Here's a B minor chord, leaving out the middle note. Here's an E major chord. Or if I want an even bigger sound, I can do this. In fact, it's even possible to throw in the fifth as well, so I could play in the left hand, if that's comfortable to reach, octave, fifth, root. So that gives a really big sound, but still doesn't sound congested. Now these voicings are particularly useful when you're playing solo piano or when you're just playing with another instrument. Once you get into a band situation, you don't necessarily want to use those chords because you'll probably have a bassist in the band, either acoustic or electric, and that's their territory. The very low notes are what they want to play. So if you're playing keyboard or even guitar, it's a good practice to stay away from lower notes, because if they're playing low notes as well as yourself, then things start to get kind of congested or even can clash. But if you're playing solo piano or just accompanying a soloist of some kind, either vocal or instrumental, it's fine and sometimes even a good idea to use these big full chords to give your sound a little more depth. So that would be one way of what's called voicing these chords. Now that's a whole couple videos on their own how to voice particular chords, but I'll leave it at that just to get you started. So that would be the next two topics I would investigate once you start to get some of the triads comfortably under your fingers. Start to explore the inversions. So you could play these chords with slightly different sounds. And then also voicing the chords in two hands so you can get a much bigger, thicker sound when playing. But remember, again, the principle is in the left hand, the lower we play on the keyboard, the more we want to spread the intervals apart so they don't sound congested and muddy. All right, so I hope this has been of some help. If you have any questions, comments, please leave them in the comments section, and I'll be happy to clarify or deal with those if they come up. Thanks again for watching, and have a great day.